Welcome to Constructed Futures. I'm Hugh Seaton. Today I'm here with Shawn Hunter, Global Sustainability Director of DuPont Shelter Solutions. Shawn, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Hugh. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you on. I have not been able to talk about sustainability and some of the other things that the building industry is facing and grappling with as much. And this particular topic is pretty relevant since half the country is baking right now. Let's talk a little bit about what you do and then we can get into it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, thanks. A pleasure to be here and just looking forward to our conversation. So many important sustainability things to talk about in our industry. So I'm Shawn Hunter. I've got the awesome responsibility of leading sustainability for the Shelter Solutions business in DuPont, which is our construction focused business unit. And it actually comprises DuPont Performance Building Solutions and Corian Design. So, what do? We provide construction solutions for both the exteriors, building envelope, and the interiors. So on the exteriors side, we're providing insulation or weatherization or air sealing solutions, the sort of things that drive energy efficiency in the building envelope. And then on the interior, we're providing decorative surfaces. So folks might be familiar with brands like Styrofoam or Tyvek or Froth-Pak or, of course, Corian on the surfaces side. So that's kind of who we are. And through my role, I have a lot of fun working with the fellow leaders in the business to define and drive our sustainability vision. What does it mean? What are we trying to do? How are we integrating that within our strategy and driving progress against that ambition? And, a key enabler of that, which is really important in what I get to do, is just to what we like to talk about as activating the sustainability that's in the DNA of our organization. And so this is really about our awesome people that come to work, every day in Shelter, excited to drive some of the sustainability progress. Just really fortunate to have so many talented and passionate people who really want to make a meaningful impact in their work, right? So when you kind of combine that energy, our innovation and technology capabilities with our sustainability ambition, then some really cool things can start to happen.
I love that. And I want to take a sec and talk about your background before DuPont. I mean, you come at this not just as someone who wants the world to be a better place, but pretty deeply understanding the chemistry and some of the other things that are driving these outcomes. You want to talk about that for a sec?
Yeah, sure thing. So I am a Michigander at heart, born and raised in the Metro Detroit area, fantastic little town of Dearborn Heights. In school, kind of developed an interest in chemistry, and that led to interest in chemical engineering. And at University of Michigan, led ultimately to PhD in chemical engineering. Along those lines, and that was kind of focused on green chemistry, but along those lines, developed a just really deep interest in sustainability. And that kind of led to, okay, well, there's some really big problems out there. And so for me, where can I help solve them? Where can I get involved and just help address some of these huge things like climate change? So I started out actually in Dow Chemical as a process researcher. And that led to an opportunity to eventually join the corporate sustainability group in Dow. And that was really kind of getting into the details on what is sustainability? What does it mean for a product manufacturer, a solutions provider? I sort of served as a consultant on sustainability to all the business units at Dow, and I became one of our subject matter experts in life cycle assessment. So, the methodology you use to measure the product carbon footprint, for example. So some really fun stuff there. Had an opportunity to help develop the 2025 corporate sustainability goals for Dow. And then that led into, eventually there was Dow and DuPont coming together, emerge and spin. And about that time, I found myself with an opportunity to move into a business role similar to what I'm doing today. And that kind of just cascaded into sustainability leader for now the building and construction business in DuPont. And in that time, we've been sort of the new DuPont now for 4 years, have been able to work on some fun things like developing our 2030 goals. And I work regularly with the other sustainability leaders across DuPont to drive progress on our 2030 goals.
And there's some things in what you just said I want to dig into because they're really cool. And the reason I asked about your pretty extraordinary qualifications is your point about the great people at DuPont and frankly, a number of companies like it, Dow being obviously one, where these amazing people are every day thinking about how to tweak it, how to make it a step better. You know what I mean? There are definitely going to be moments where, oh my God, we discovered something, you wouldn't believe it. But really, it's lots of people making lots of incremental tweaks and changes and progress that take us from where we are to somewhere that seems impossible. I mean, 2% a year improvement accumulates, doesn't it?
Well, it's funny you say that, because actually one of our like mantras in the business is 1% better.
Yep.
Right? If we can just get 1% better every day, like fascinating, phenomenal things happen. And so, yeah, I mean, the culture aspect, I just love how much our organization has really grown as the 4 years that we've been together, as you do see people, just taking on sustainability, applying it directly in their work, asking, what can I do to make a difference? And to your point around, maybe you're inventing something, some new cool technology in the lab. Like, we actually just had a strategy review, an innovation strategy review recently, and you're kind of walking in there and you've got these new prototypes of things that, like, we didn't think we could do that, but yet somebody with a little bit of time on a Friday afternoon here and there figured out how to do it. And they do that because it's their passion, right? Like, that's why they want to be here. That's what excites them. And so, what I try to do is, like, how can I best amplify and harness that energy just to move the needles in the ways that we need to on sustainability?
Yeah. And if you think about what someone's going to be thinking about on a Sunday night, spreadsheets are exciting, he says with a wink. But the reality is that's what motivates teams, right? Is there's a vision bigger than quarterly results. And being able to say that, yeah, it may not look like a big deal, but that 1% plus 1% plus 1%, you actually get somewhere pretty amazing faster than you think. And the old adage that we always overestimate 5 years and underestimate 10 years. That's exactly a cumulative result thing, where it looks flat until suddenly that the compounding interest, for lack of a better word, starts to really matter. And suddenly you find yourself in a place you never thought you'd be.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, it's the thing that I've really noticed is just how sustainability specifically has become such a part of our regular internal conversations and our regular ideation sessions. And, you kind of had to drive that because, if I look back across my career, right, there was a point in time where folks were kind of saying, well, hey, sustainability, like, feels like the right thing to do, but, can we actually work on that? Like, our customers going to care? And so just the level of visibility that we're at today compared to, the past is just phenomenal. So it just creates, like, the avenue for those folks to jump in and drive the 1% better. And actually, Hugh, we've got some cases where we've driven a bit more than 1% better. And so that's super exciting as well.
I bet really motivating, right? Like you said, when somebody unveils something that you didn't even consider possible, and you're like, wow, he got it done. Now let's productize it. And for another few years.
Right. Well, hopefully you can run sprints and go faster. But yeah, that is essentially the crux of our sustainable innovation approach.
And when you think about that, you mentioned that the ground has shifted a little bit in terms of people's view of the importance of sustainability and really the practicality of it. How do you think about the responsibility of the broader building and construction industry?
That's such a great question, and one that I can tell you that my why is to help address sustainability, help drive climate action, right? But I think you would hear that why reflected across so many of our team members, our colleagues. And you made the statement about the world being on fire. I mean, clearly, Hugh, you've been watching the news lately, right? Like, you can't pull up a news story or check social media without hearing about some climate type of impact. Something that I even brought to sort of what we call core value contacts, or kind of like a safety moment at a leadership team meeting last week. But we're seeing just all these climate related records falling, right? Unprecedented heat waves, highest temperatures ever recorded, looking at all the wildfires, the flooding, ocean temperatures that are, like, off the charts. And even yesterday, there was a report that came out that kind of looked at, this is just crazy stuff, the potential for the ocean current in the northern Atlantic that helps regulate climate, for that current and that whole system to collapse as soon as 2050. And so this stuff, it blows your mind a wee bit. We're seeing in real time clearly what the IPCC mentions when they talk about the climate change is not tomorrow, it is here today. It's touching every part of the planet. And where I live in Michigan, what I'm afraid is that this is going to be the year where all of a sudden air quality alerts from Canadian wildfires became a regular thing. Like we never had that. So we've been focusing, just as one more anecdote, like looking at Canada, and Canada is literally on fire from coast to coast. They actually set their record for most acres of wildfire burned for the entire year back in June. And so just this unprecedented stuff. So you look at it and say, man, this is motivating what our responsibility should be in our industry. And so if I kind of pivot back to my why, why do I not live in all of that red news, but why do I focus on all the green possibilities? It is back to what the IPCC again has said, is that there is still time to act, right? So we can still choose to secure a livable future for all, as IPCC puts it. And so that to me, that is our responsibility, right? We know, of course, that the building and construction industry is a pretty significant contributor of global greenhouse gas emissions, right? You'll hear the 40% number of all GHGs thrown out there, and that breaks down into two really important areas. About 28% or so from operating our buildings. So, what we like to call operational carbon, and then another 9% or so on the emissions that are emitted to make our building products, or what we call embodied carbon. So this is kind of where we're at. It's a huge impact and a huge opportunity for our industry. And I think, the ultimate responsibility then is to drive to zero emissions and do that at a fast enough pace.
That's a big vision. What listening to you and also just thinking about the progression we're talking about in both cases, both on the needs side, which is the progression of climate change and its impacts, but also on the innovation side where we're trying to address it. Both of them are not linear. And I think it's an interesting way of looking at it, like this 1% a year or 1% a day, whatever the period is. The whole point is it compounds, and that's not linear. In the beginning, it kind of does look flat, but the curve starts to get really steep as you accumulate innovation and effort. But I think that's also our issue with climate change, right? Is we're as humans and as just animals, we are used to linear change. You add one, you add another, and there you are. We cannot think intuitively in nonlinear ways. So the fact that it's not going to keep getting worse at the pace that we're seeing, but actually there are going to be moments where suddenly it's a lot worse, is really hard for us to understand. And what, the picture I'm hearing you paint a little bit is it's the race between two curves. One of them is our ability to address it, and the other one is the impacts from past behavior, which is a pretty interesting way of pitting the problem. Not sure how often I hear it put that way, but in both cases, you're talking about accumulations and what happens when that accumulation accelerates. So I got a little geeky there, but you get me thinking like that. See, I talked to a PhD and all of a sudden I use longer words.
That's all good conversation. But I think you've hit the nail on the head of why, one of the big reasons why this problem is so hard to solve based on the non-linearity. We're just not used to things that have tipping points that you might not exactly know when the tipping point is. But then all of a sudden you're there. So there is kind of that, okay, let's make sure we're monitoring what's going on and understanding where things are going. When it comes to tipping points, I also like to look at, though, the tipping points of action, right? And so when do we get to the point when EVs are tipping and it's the norm, or renewable electricity is out there, it's the norm, right? So you try to build towards those things. And for us, when you get to the tipping point when you're seeing the built environment decarbonize rapidly at the pace that we need to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis. So those are the nonlinear things, Hugh, that I hope we're able to drive.
Yeah, there's certainly enough people that are interested in doing it. And the hard part with all of this is you're talking about mini ecosystems of activity where everybody may want an EV, but there's no way the grid can handle it. So are we making investments, but do we have the right technology to make that work? Or are we just putting, 20-year-old, 30-year-old technology, just adding more to it when it comes to the grid? So I think all of it is moving. Hopefully, to your point, there are moments when it clicks together and bang, we've got some pretty fast change.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that when you talk about like what technologies are out there, what do we need? We know how to build a high-performing building in many cases, right? We've got the solutions. We know how to create a fantastically energy-efficient envelope. In other cases, there might be innovation that's still needed. And I think a lot of that is really what drives our overall sustainability ambition as a business. So, within DuPont, we'll talk about our overall approach sort of being that we are an innovation-led growth company, and we want to solve big, important problems that matter. We'll talk about our purpose as being to empower the world with the essential innovations to thrive. So very innovation focused and very thrive focused, and a lot of nice little words. But I say if we can actually activate that and bring that to life regularly in what we do, then we can have a huge impact. So if you look at, of course, where we're at in the built environment, we've talked about we're not sustainable today. I mean, really, there's not a sustainable system today yet. But beyond the 40% of greenhouse gas emissions, we know that our industry is responsible for about a third of all waste. And of course, we rely on many hazardous chemistries that have to be managed safely and can be managed safely across the life cycle, but they still present an opportunity. So when we think about what does sustainability mean to us, what are our customers asking for from us, and where can we make an impact, we kind of bring it down to these 3 C's around climate, circularity, and chemicals. And so what we'll say is that we want to partner with our customers in the industry to help drive the total carbon of buildings to zero, and to advance material circularity in the industry, and to help drive adoption of greener chemistries that are safe and sustainable by design. So I'm kind of capturing those 3 C's. But just back to that point of technology and engineers and science, because we are so steeped in science as a company and as a business, and particularly in building science in our business, we've basically adopted a mindset that what we have to do is to use building science to innovate as if our future depends on it. And, we really believe that it does.
There's some cool stuff in there. This empowering innovations to thrive. I just butchered it a little bit, but I love that there are a number of words in there that speak to what you just talked about. One of them is it's about helping and about enabling, empowering. The idea that innovation is at the core of it, because ultimately I think that more than anything will solve or address the problems. But also this idea of thriving, not saying you have to do less, not saying you have to make massive sacrifices in the short run, possibly, but ultimately the goal is, how does humanity and how does society thrive, and how do we create things that allow for that without the same damage and cost that current solutions create? It's a really compelling way of looking at it.
Yeah, right. Why would our vision be anything different? One of the definitions of sustainability that I like, that I think originated with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, is something like, what is sustainability? Well, it means 8, 9, 10 billion people living well and within the limits of the planet. And we definitely know we're not there yet today, but that should be our North Star.
Absolutely. I'd love if you can dive in a little on what you mean by circularity. That is an idea that's been around, but I don't think is as commonly used as it could be.
Yes. So I would say through, some of the early books, like from McDonough and Braungart on Cradle to Cradle, like the concept of circularity might have been invented in our industry. Don't know. But, it's the whole idea that, back to almost the linear thinking. If you look at our material economy, right, all the stuff that we pull out of the earth, harvest from the air, whatever it is, and turn it into our products. Ultimately, most of the time, those things just go to waste. They go to landfill. They're incinerated. They're not part of a circular economy where they should be used again. They're part of this linear economy. And so if you look at how do we manage our resources in the best way, and how do we not design waste into systems, but design waste out of systems, that's really what the circular economy is all about. It'll also talk about sort of keeping a material at its highest value throughout the life cycle. So if you're recovering a material at end of life, rather than maybe just recycling it directly back into new material, maybe there's a second life or a third life that can be applied before you have to use it again. So there are those pieces. But the one thing that always sticks with me on the circular economy is just a comment that somebody made one time, that waste is a human concept, which means that, of course, nature has figured out how not to waste anything. And so if we can emulate that a little bit more, we might be able to solve some of these challenges.
Yeah, and I'll sidetrack us for a second. You and I spoke about this earlier, that in certain industries, some parts of the petrochemical industry being an example, I think outsiders don't fully get how much engineering and effort has gone into really, really using outputs as inputs and making it so that this circularity is starting to work, because people are saying that, okay, I built a thing, and after I'm done with the materials that were used, either the thing itself or other materials, I then create a second process that uses that as inputs and creates something new. And this winds up becoming a cascade that can be really surprising how effective, and how there really is nothing at the end of some of these processes. So I think people that don't live in this problem like you do maybe don't appreciate how much a company like DuPont is thinking about these steps, and how do we add a step so that there's nothing going into a landfill, or there's nothing going into the air or the sea, or so on. Not that you've gotten there already, but the point we made earlier about, dozens and hundreds of people in a company like DuPont who are activated and thinking about innovation, that's a lot of where that goes, right? Is how are we making the process more efficient, or how are we making our outputs? And I'm not making promises on your behalf. I'm saying that someone who isn't in it may not know what you mean by innovation. And a lot of it, to me anyway, is stuff like that, is how are we making sure nothing is, as I say, finding its way into a landfill? Maybe that's the problem for today or for 2 years from now. But this idea of circular economy, the way it shows up, at least as I've seen it, is what you said before, is that there's no reason for waste. Like, either we change the original chemistry, which sometimes is kind of unavoidable, or we're thinking about how to use it downstream in ways to create new value and new products and so on. So I think that's really exciting. And I think that this is where, again, a large entity like DuPont can do things that it's harder for a startup to do, because you have just the sheer manpower, brain power to be able to look at a holistic cycle in a much more kind of sophisticated way. And again, that's just the argument for a larger business looking at some of these, whereas smaller businesses often will make smaller breakthroughs and so on. Is that how you're seeing some of this?
Yeah. What I like about what you just said is it has to start with the intention, right? You have to be looking for those opportunities.
Yeah.
Maybe some are obvious, and hey, we improve the yield a little bit, less waste, better throughput, higher productivity, all those good things. But where are the things where you have to intentionally look for those opportunities and find the things that work? So yeah, that is a mindset. And I mean, we've got a number of folks who are focused specifically on kind of the circularity aspect, and some really cool early stage projects that we've been doing. You mentioned kind of landfill. We're in our building industry. I mean, we're just so lucky that we've got so many like conduits for sustainability conversation. There are some certifications that you can use to kind of demonstrate your being sort of a zero landfill facility. And so one of those is the True certification, for example. And we're looking into that work at some of our facilities. But if you look at just sort of the circularity opportunity, sometimes you have to find small wins that still, they're levers that can be pulled while you look for the bigger solution that maybe that's the ultimate vision. So if I take something like our Korean design business, one of the things that the way that sort of Korean design works, right? These are surfaces, this is countertops, right? Sinks, that sort of thing. When architects and designers are looking at this material, well, they want to see a sample of it in person, right? It's kind of like if you're going to paint your room, you usually get your paint swatches, take it home, see how it sits in, your particular light. And so that whole sample thing is something that's been out there for a while. You send a sample and someone looks at it and they make their choice, and then they toss their samples. Well, hey, wouldn't it actually make a lot more sense if we could just get those samples back? And Korean is material actually that can be recycled. So could we actually recycle those samples into new product, or even find other purposeful things to do with it rather than just, tossing it in the landfill? And so towards the end of last year, we actually started this sample take back program, which is pretty straightforward. I mean, we send a prepaid return shipping label to all of our commercial architect and designer customers who are ordering samples. And they make their decision, drop it in the bag, and it comes back. And so it's sort of a little win, but it's a meaningful win, because folks want to see that we are purposely and intentionally looking to advance circularity where we can. And that's just one of the things that we've been able to do.
And it's interesting that what sounds like it's not a big deal, when you add that across how many samples, I mean, at the size of your business, it's meaningful. I mean, you're talking tons of product. I don't even want to think about what the quantities are, but they matter. And the interesting thing, Shawn, is that I think there's a lot of innovation where it's not necessarily the thing you're looking at that's driving some of the results. It's just process that gets you to what people normally see. And I think, again, that's the value of having lots of people thinking in the same direction. Is someone's going to, there was a meeting, I'm sure, where someone was like, we seem to put a lot of these samples out there. And if we accumulate that, that's actually kind of a lot, presumably more than one meeting, but somebody thought of it that way. And to your point, the intention was there, and it shows up, especially when it happens over time, right? In the first month or year, you go to the obvious stuff, but after a while, people, again, on a Sunday afternoon, they're just thinking, they're like, oh my gosh, that's right. We leave a lot of these in a, I don't know, warehouse somewhere, or we send too many of these out, or we're actually not very efficient in how we send them out. So there's lots of ways where as you tighten the bolts, you can get more and more efficient.
For sure. One of the things that you touched on there that is so critical is it's really about the people. And this is where the culture just comes into play, because yeah, I think in many conversations over the past however many years, the idea was thrown around, right? And maybe even some customer feedback that said, hey, could you do something with these samples? But it takes the intention and the right person in the right role to say, hey, wait, we could actually make this happen. And so, back to kind of activating that DNA, that's just an example where you have to have the intentions and the capabilities kind of all brought together to sometimes make things happen, versus maybe there have been ideas in the past that didn't quite move forward. So yes, just hitting the importance of culture once again.
Love it. Well, let's kind of bring this into a close with just a little bit about kind of the performance building solutions, the part of the entity that you're a part of, as well as the design, the climate goals that Corian Design has. How do you guys think of that, and what are some specifics that are on your mind?
Yeah. So again, climate is this thing, I think, this thread that knits us all together in the built environment. And so when you see the things that are happening today, or even the past many years, if it fires you up as much as it does us, you start to ask, what can we do? So one of the big things that all of us can do, and that we've committed to, is basically to reduce your own greenhouse gas emissions fast enough. And fast enough meaning to help limit the global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this magic number of 1.5 C is actually the ambition under the Paris Climate Agreement. And it's, sort of this point at which scientists have told us, well, things go from bad to like really bad. You start to hit the tipping points and all this stuff. So stay away from going above 1.5. And for context, today we're already at 1.1. So we're getting pretty close. And again, we're already seeing effects, and we know there's more to come. So we really focus on how do we stay under 1.5 C, and then that kind of gets you to this idea of there being a carbon budget. So there's really only so much carbon more that we can emit and stay under that 1.5 C. And so then it's a matter of, all right, well, we have to bend the curve, have to reduce emissions fast enough. And as an organization, how do you do that? Well, it turns out that there is actually a group out there that will look at your climate goals and assess whether you are reducing your emissions fast enough. And so that's this initiative called the Science-Based Targets Initiative. And they do exactly that in terms of helping you identify, are you moving fast enough, or do you need to do more? And so as a company, what we realized a couple of years ago was that our initial goal of a 30% reduction from 2019 to 2030, that 30% wasn't aggressive enough. And so we kind of started to think a little bit more about, like, man, what can we do? How can we strengthen that target? And so we worked with SBTI, and we announced earlier this year an updated, a more ambitious climate goal of 50% reduction. And that's 50% based on, this is getting a little wonky, but 50% based on scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are, scope 1 is like your direct emissions, like from your sites. And scope 2 would be for purchased energy, usually purchased electricity. So the bulk of, those, what it takes to run your operations. We upped our goal to 50% reduction by 2030. In addition to that, there's also this thing called scope 3, which is basically everything else. All carbon emissions upstream of your operations and all carbon emissions downstream of your operations associated with your products. And so we added a goal around scope 3 as well. So, this idea of are we all doing enough or not? We were
Right.
able to look at that through SBTI. And one other thing at the business level, so that was at the company level. But if we looked even further at a business level for performance building solutions and Corian design, we saw that we could do more, actually. So we set a target of 75% reduction for our individual business. And earlier this year, we launched our second annual sustainability progress report, and we reported for the first time on what are our greenhouse gas emissions at the business level. And we're really excited to demonstrate that we've actually reduced our business CO2 emissions by 41% from 2019 to 2022. So already making some pretty good progress against our 75% target. One other thing that I'd hit really quickly is, you have to mind your own shop for sure. But what about those other scope 3 emissions? What about the solutions that you're bringing to your customers? And there we know that we've talked about operational carbon and the importance of energy efficiency. Embodied carbon is something else that we can impact. And so another big part of our climate goal is to develop low embodied carbon products. We've got some really good examples, some really good progress on that. We have our low GWP, low global warming potential, Froth-Pak spray foam insulation and sealant product, where our innovation team reformulated the product and found a blowing agent solution that reduced essentially the greenhouse gas intensity of the blowing agent solution by 99%. So huge win, kind of back to the, a bit more than 1% better.
Yeah.
Awesome innovation there. That's been winning innovation and sustainability awards. We're super proud of that team. Similarly, on our Styrofoam brand XPS insulation, another opportunity to reduce the global warming potential or the greenhouse gas intensity of the blowing agent. Totally different product line, totally different solution, totally different challenges to make happen, but yet another innovation team delivering. And there we measured the embodied carbon. We looked at the environmental product declarations. We applied life cycle assessment, from kind of the before and after, and found that through that innovation, we've actually reduced the embodied carbon associated with the product by 94%. So making some pretty big reductions where we're able to kind of get at that 9% of global embodied carbon emissions. And of course, we're looking for more. I mean, we will celebrate these successes. It's, awesome things that our teams have done and continue to do. But, we've got that next batch of things in the pipeline that we need to continue driving because, as we all know, like we are not done until we are at net zero in our industry. And I'd add even looking back at the possibility of a carbon regenerative system, but, one step at a time.
Some really exciting stuff. Well, Shawn, this has been really great. I've appreciated hearing all of what you're doing, all of what DuPont is doing, and kind of the industry more broadly. I'll leave with in the show notes. There are some really cool reports that you guys have produced, so I'll leave a link to that. But Shawn, thank you for being on the podcast. Love to hear from you guys again.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Hugh. It's a pleasure to be here, and I know we're all on the same journey to innovate as if our future depends on it because we know that it does. So thanks again.